The MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school from the rest.
At MIT, we talk about addressing the world's biggest challenges, and that right there says it all for impact.
The Sloan central purpose is organizations are the path by which great ideas have an impact in the world.
We are in the business of helping people become better leaders, principled, innovative leaders who improve the world.
I have brilliant colleagues, but also colleagues who, at the core, are working to improve the world and to build something for real.
So every person and every colleague that I have at MIT, I think our business is to try to make the world a much better place.
Today's world, you see a tremendous amount of alienation, of class separation. The one thing everybody agrees on is entrepreneurship is a great thing.
Bill Olet, in many ways, is the example, from central casting of the entrepreneur turned catalyst. He likes creating the conditions so that others can learn. And he has been an extraordinarily successful leader of the Martin Trust Center.
It's my firm belief that studying sustainability is perfectly suited for a school of management.
For years, John has been basically driving home this idea of how it's all a systems and we have to view the world through a systems lens. Here's someone who is absolutely at the top of his game as a scholar, and yet is completely committed to translating that scholarship into change in the real world.
What I'm really interested and excited by is to figure out how to use insights from finance and financial tools to improve the world.
Antoinette has this knack of finding problems and data that lead to pay dirt, that lead to something that has much broader implications. And when she digs into a problem, she often goes 1 or 2 layers deeper than other people have, and she finds out things that other people have missed.
Taking care of complex systems is almost like taking care of a human. You need to really understand the underlying mechanism of the current problem in order to really fix it.
We worked with a number of groups, failed multiple times, and then came across Retsev and his team. This work has had an enormous impact on the lives of thousands of patients. Partnering with Retsev and folks at Sloan has been so enormously helpful to us. Not only understanding the science of operations management, but actually making it happen in an organization that is made up of people.
At Sloan, we often like to say a better world is our business. That has a lot of implications, and I think this is a very profound statement.
It's a great idea that's turned into a great action that makes the world a better place.
The questions that are incredibly ambitious, that are incredibly impactful to humankind.
How we engage with that outside world, business leaders, policymakers in every kind of organization.
Using capitalism, which is the most powerful force the world's ever seen, to be able to take and make the world a better place.
And so if we can contribute to that, if we can have impact with our ideas, that's the ultimate reward.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for participating. My name is Dave Schmidtlein. I'm Dean of MIT's Sloan School of Management. Tonight, briefly, is an evening of stories. These stories, all of them, belong to you. In this little video clip, you saw some of the stories that unfold at MIT Sloan every day. You saw some of the leaders in our community among our faculty working toward real solutions to some of the world's most challenging and important problems. I think equally interestingly, you saw some leaders from the wider world who've worked with those faculty and who've been amazed at the nature, the scope of the impact. We're in the business of developing principled, innovative leaders who improve the world, honestly. And those people are our staff, our students, our faculty, and our alumni. This is a community that chooses to work on hard problems, to develop creative and rigorous solutions, to see those through to implementation, and to sustainable and positive impact. This is a place, honestly, where ideas are made to matter. This is an important time for that kind of impact. If you look at this time of change and challenge, we know, for instance, that the private sector is going to have to do much more to fund basic science, to fund drug delivery, drug discovery. How? We know that outmoded systems of transportation and healthcare need to be reinvented. The public and private sector and thought leaders, people who understand complex systems, have to find the ways to do that. We know, including from the last few weeks, that the kind of sustainable business practices that the world needs are going to have to increasingly be developed, not by law, but by private sector innovation. We need people who are able to stimulate that innovation. We know that the financial systems in this country and in the world need greater efficiency. They need greater resilience. And we need the people who will deliver not less modern finance, but better modern finance. And in areas like cybersecurity and digital resilience, we know that they're going to represent larger and larger shares of the headlines in the years ahead. And we need the people who can not only develop the science and technology to protect us, but also the human factors, how people and machines interact, how people interact with each other in economic systems. All of this is needed and more. All of it is coming. MIT Sloan is at the center of all of it, energetic and effective. Now you think of the faculty of the school as leaders in this regard, I hope, and they are. But it's not only the faculty. You are an amazing alumni community. And as I've gotten to know thousands of you over the last 10 years, I've seen how that community resonates with the idea that MIT changed you. It didn't just give you opportunities. It didn't just give you skills. It changed how you act. It changed who you are. And so when I think of those needs that we just talked about, and when I'm here in New York, I think of alumni like Frederick Karist. So last week, Frederick was here in New York City because his company, Okta, went public on the NASDAQ, was valued at over $1 billion, and from just 8 years ago, as an energetic entrepreneurship student at Sloan, he's taken this company, which is all about cybersecurity and digital resilience, to a place of impact, and we're so proud of him. I think of someone like Ben Gali, who I think was called away, many of you know Ben, as Chief Risk Officer for BlackRock. Ben is someone smart and grounded whose perspectives on financial resilience make a real and positive difference. I think of someone like Lee Scholl. Lee, I think, is maybe still here, unless I warned her that I was going to mention her and she snuck away. Lee is an MBA 2011 graduate. She's Senior Director and Innovation Architect at Visa, and is driving Visa's innovations in fintech, and next month will open Visa's Innovation Center here in New York City. Now, I am all about New York City. It's only about New York City. There are great alums around the world. One last example, maybe before we turn in other directions, would be someone who's not here in New York, He's in Venezuela. His name is Lorenzo Mendoza. For those who may not be familiar with him, he's a successful business person in that country. He's also the bravest person that I know. He's been described as the last protector of civil society in Venezuela. And when I asked him, why do you continue to put yourself at personal risk and your family at risk and continue to speak out about economic and personal freedom, he says, who else but someone from MIT? So when we think about the character of some of these people, I do hear from them that MIT mattered to them. It matters, I think, as a concept, but also to turn back to the faculty for a minute. It matters in the ways that our alumni, our students, you, were shaped by those faculty. So turning from talking about alums, I'd like to turn to the faculty for a few minutes. One particular person's story, I think, illustrates some of what we've just been talking about. His name is Professor Roberto Rigobon. Anybody know Roberto here in the room? So our plan this evening was to have Roberto come and tell you his story himself, but he broke his shoulder in an accident, I'm sorry to say. That's true. That part is actually true.
David, no, I made it. I am here, David. How are you, everybody? Good evening.
Oh, my goodness. Here he is.
Hi, hello, how are you? I am, man, I recognize you from classes. Are you sure you graduated? Good. Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great honor. In fact, I actually injured my shoulder. Thank you, David. And you know the stories. When you are 20 to 30 years old, you injure your shoulder in a motorcycle accident or something like that. When you are between 30 and 40, you injure your shoulder, in a ski accident. When you're older than 50, like myself, you injure your shoulder by reaching the remote control. It's really pathetic. But I made it here because I have superhero strength. Is that okay? I cannot fly, so I walk from Boston. I actually have been walking from Monday. As I said, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. And what I want to do is to tell you a little bit about the story about the Billion Prizes Project and how it started, and in fact, how you have contributed and helped that project. Some of you might know Alberto Cavallo. Has anyone here know Alberto? Was a classmate of Alberto? Anyone? Yeah, I see a couple of you. So, about 15 years ago, Alberto and I started to think about how we measure life in general. And when you think about it, we measure life really badly. For example, how do you know a relationship is in bad shape? Usually when it's broken. Now, when do you know a society is upset? Usually when you have riots. How do you know a lake is being polluted? Almost when we're losing it. When do we diagnose sadness? Usually when it becomes depression. It's very interesting that we tend to measure things badly and late. And we have been doing this for half a century. And in fact, we have very little question how we do that. When Alberto and I started, we started with a very simple question. We wanted to understand how inflation rates were computed in the world and how we could improve that. And we started with the case of Argentina because Argentina had intervened the statistical office, and there was we were concerned that they were manipulating the data. And in fact, we proved that they were manipulating the data. And I remember how we started. We started in Alberto's laptop. Then we started with 4 countries, downloading data from one supermarket in each of these countries, about 2,000 data points in each of them. Then we got greedy, so We installed that in my server. Then the server was not enough, so I purchased 3 other servers and we put them in my office. Then that was not enough. In fact, the fire department came and said that was a fire hazard because apparently it was very hot. In fact, my office was super hot. And it's not due to the looks of the faculty. So you know, I moved down to the basement of the Sloan School, and then we continued buying servers. And there was a moment in time that, you know, we have actually purchased about 3/4 of the computing power of the Sloan School. In fact, if you had to send an email, you almost had to ask permission from myself. So anyone that was criticizing or giving me bad grades in class on my performance, I was just, you know, sending them a virus and then killing their computer and killing the computers of their families and everything like that. So then the dean kicked me out. Anyway, but that project that started with about 2,000 items in 4 countries and only 4 retailers, today we track literally millions of products every single day. We download about 1 billion prices every week. We track items and prices from 100 countries and thousands of retailers worldwide. And our goal is to try to measure things differently, is to try to provide procedures that can help statistical offices and central banks to measure things that they didn't even think about measuring before. And in fact, I would say that when we see inflation rate about 3 months before it happens in the official statistics. When we see problems of natural disasters, we can see the economic impact of a natural disaster within weeks of the natural disaster. You understand that the best economic information we have about a natural disaster are the images on TV. That's it. We measure GDP with 9-month delay. We have no clue what happens. So indeed, our job has been trying to change that. This project is a very strange project. Because first it has a crazy economist from Venezuela and a confused, crazy economist from Argentina. And we are using computer science techniques to gather data, using statistical techniques that nobody cares, to answer questions that we thought we were answering correctly before. So this project was impossible to finance. Belonged to many different silos in the way we think about financing. We were not a computer science project. We were not an economics project. We were not a statistics project. We were a freak. You know, we were a typical MIT project. And it was actually thankful to MIT and the Sloan School that we were able to have that expansion. This happened entirely through MIT. There were 83 people that have worked in this project. There are 25 that still work full-time on that project. And in fact, these are the real individuals that they download the data, they clean the data, they construct the indexes, and they find innovations on methodologies, and we share these with the statistical offices and the central banks. When the US closed the BLS about 3 years ago in October, we provided the data to the central bank. So these are you might wonder, then what do I do? No, as a senior faculty, actually, to be honest, we do nothing. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I actually do the most difficult part of the project, which is I take 100% of the credit and all the money and all the fame, okay? And I deal with all the celebrities. So, you know, when Lady Gaga calls me and says, you know, Roberto, you're traveling a lot. You should stop traveling. And she says, like, you know, I have 100 million reasons why you should walk away. And I said, but I only need one good one to stay. And I don't know if you have heard that, but that was just a private conversation. But truly, actually, these are the individuals that actually did the help. It was MIT. It's a project that was done by MIT through the MIT students, and it was financed that way. This is not the end of the story. My goal is to change the way we measure every aspect of life. And I have a framework that I go through when I think about the problems of the world. I call it PROMISE. And the reason is because it reminds me of all the dimensions that matter. The P for personal, R for relationships, O for organizations, N for markets and the economy, I for institutions, S for social and political, and E for the ecosystem and the environment. If we are going to solve the important problems of the world, and as David highlighted, we want to tackle those problems at MIT, we have to find solutions that are consistent along all these dimensions. We have to find ways that we, private sector, has an ability to find answers to those questions. And a society where everything works but individuals are very unhappy doesn't look like a viable society. On the other hand, a place where everybody is super happy but they're destroying the environment and the markets do not work and the institutions are horrible and the organizations are pathetic, well, that's Brazil. We know that that's not viable either. And in a place that everything is lousy, well, that's kind of the Trump cabinet. We know that that's not going to last too long. Anyway, so we need to find solutions that are consistent among all these dimensions. And to do that, we need to change the measurements. I started 2 weeks ago a new project with Spain and Mexico, where we're going to try to measure stress inside the households. We're going to try to measure how much stress families have. And we're not going to violate privacy, but I think it's very important to understand, when you're looking at the United States, to understand which are the spots where the families are suffering the most. Which are those spots where income shocks are affecting the behavior of individuals the most. Because if we are going to design policies that improve the standards of living of individuals, we better start getting better information so we can target our efforts better. The day you measure better, it changes life. The day you get one of these devices in your wrist and it starts measuring your steps, you suddenly start walking more. And in fact, there was a statement, title of a paper that I read from John Hauser, again, another MIT faculty, and where he says, you are what you measure. Indeed, I think that we are what we measure. This is not a sexy project, not at all. It was hard to sell, but it was embraced by the MIT community. And these are the problems that are worth fighting for. Let me say a couple of things about you and my colleagues at MIT. So I always, every time I enter a Sloan School, I receive what is called a humbleness shock. And the reason is I feel incredibly inadequate. When I look at the staff, at the students, and at my colleagues, the first thing that comes to my mind is, how on earth did they accept me in this building? I mean, given who I am and what I do, like, somebody made a massive mistake. But truly, when I look at the quality of the staff and their pursuit of excellence on everything that they do, it's humbling. When I look at the quality of the research projects and the quality of the mind of the faculty and my colleagues, it's actually overwhelming. I realize that it actually drives me to try to be better and try to be stronger. And then I meet you in the classroom, and your questions force me to actually be better. You demand that I become better. And I just want to thank you for that. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I remember the first time I taught my MBA class, I received an email that had 6 pages of the person telling me how bad my class was. Truly. 6 pages. I still keep that one. And I remember on the 3rd class, I asked the students, clearly I am failing dramatically, because on the 2nd day, I think I received like 10 of those emails, by the way. And I said, can you teach me how to teach you? And they did. They actually taught me how to teach. They told me how I should actually be myself and how I could transmit what was valuable to you. Because in some sense, you always have had in your mind ideas that matter to you. And you told me how I could actually make mine equally relevant. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay. Apparently, I have to teach tomorrow, otherwise they don't pay me my salary. So unfortunately, we have to go back to the airport and go back to Boston. But what I want to do before I leave is I want to share with you some videos of other faculty at MIT that they were unable to come. Now, they have no excuses because not a single one has a broken shoulder. I just want to highlight the fact that who truly loves you, okay? Yes, just to make clear, okay? So when you go back to your reunions and you're gonna bring wine, because you always bring back wine, okay? And you can bring wine to your preferred professor, but remember who really loves you, okay? So it's not like we have a tally, but actually I have collected twice more bottles than John Sterman, okay? And I always send him selfies with my bottles of wine, and he sells me a selfie with his only bottle of wine. So I just want to clarify. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity, the organizers and David for allowing me to be here. I hope our paths cross again, and I promise you the next time I will not be teaching on Friday, so I will be able to stay. Thank you so much. Here you have my colleagues.
I grew up in a complex system in the Israeli military. I spent there almost 12 years, and when I started my academic career, I tried to kind of study similar systems. And it's very hard to think about systems that are more complex than healthcare systems. It's also a very important system in terms of what it delivers at the end for the world and for individual people, including people that are close to me. So we started at some point to really try and address major patient flow disruptions that the MGH had in their perioperative care system, in moving patients that finished their surgery in the operating room into the recovery area that is typically called PACU. The first question they ask us, how many beds do we need to add to the PACU? Very quickly, we realized that the real problem is not between the operating rooms and the PACU, the recovery area, but in fact, the inability to actually move patients from the recovery area to a general floor in the hospital. The key is actually not to start and talk about the problem in terms of efficiency, but actually start from how do we improve the experience of the patient. When you try to improve the experience that the patients have, you actually also improve the efficiency of the system. Maybe unlike what people could think if they kind of don't dive into the details. When I teach the students in the class about complex systems in general, but on health systems in particular, I always tell them that if you want to change something, you need to understand how it was created. You need to actually assume that there is an underlying rationale that created the current system. A rationale that is not necessarily taking its roots from purely logical aspects, but also cultural aspects, value aspects, political aspects. The Sloan School of Management and MIT are one of the few places that could integrate those perspectives in an effective way. What I like about the Sloan School of Management is you have a very high density of people that really aspire to change the world and make it a better place. We have all the elements to actually leverage the expertise to create a new way of thinking about these systems, both in the United States and across the globe, in a way that I think could actually have a global footprint.
MIT Sloan really is a place that I adore. It's never just research for research's sake or to just publish, but to achieve something or to change something in the real world. So people thought that in the crisis of 2008 that the subprime customers and the subprime segment were driving the disarray in the market. Now, When we actually looked at the data, we were really almost shocked and surprised when we saw that this is actually not what was going on. We looked at very large-scale data sets that allowed us to map the entire mortgage industry and the entire mortgage market in the US. And what we found is that the subprime market, yes, it was growing in the pre-crisis period, but most of the mortgage dollars were flowing to middle-class and upper-middle-class people. So exactly the opposite of the subprime narrative. In addition, we actually found, if we look at post-2008, where did the defaults come from? The biggest increase were in middle-class households and upper-middle-class households, not so much in the subprime. Now you can ask, how come that people didn't see this before? What did we do that others didn't do? The big difference in our work that we actually really looked at individual decision makers. It will tell you that it doesn't help the financial market if we prevent poorer people from also getting mortgages because they were not at the heart of the crisis. But if you look at the data post-2008, it has become extremely difficult for lower-income households and even younger households to buy houses and to have mortgages, while richer people still have access to mortgages. So why is it so important for me that we get this right and that we understand the real sources of the crisis? Because we really want to make policy that's evidence-guided, that's evidence-based, that's not just opinions that people have. And if we have this better understanding, we can actually help industry and policymakers to level the playing field in the right direction for people.
I consider myself an accidental academic. I was really just a business person. And as a business person, I was really a basketball player who couldn't play anymore. And I liked the whole part of business where it was merit-based, where you could really earn it. And I felt that being an entrepreneur was more merit-based than when I was working at IBM, because I could impact things more directly. So the conventional wisdom has been that entrepreneurship can't be taught, and it's just something you're born with, or it's magical. And I think that this first got cracked in 1991 when Ed Roberts wrote the first book that took entrepreneurship seriously as a field of study where no one had really done that before. The Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship first believes that entrepreneurship is a craft. It's not an art, it's not a science, but it's something that can be taught, but it needs to be taught with first principles and kind of strong mentorship as you would teach a craft. We're not focused on, is this startup going to work or not? We are trying to teach people how to fish, not catch a fish, to be able to do it over and over and over again. We start with the heart. This creates the spirit and mindset that people want to be. The second thing is, it's a head, it's the knowledge. The third one is the hands, because it's not just enough to know what to do, you have to implement it. And the last H is the home. When you walk into the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, every detail has been thought through, every square foot. There's a coffee machine, and it's a really good coffee machine. And you have to understand, we are very, very cheap. But spending money on the coffee machine is one of the most important things because it brings people together. Every detail is thought through so the students can create serendipitous collisions to work with each other. But then when they want to start to work, they can go off and they can find their nooks to work with people together. And they can do different types of work there, including building product. We have the best students in the world. And they don't take themselves too seriously, but they take their mission very, very seriously. And as this world gets to have more and more uncertainty, more and more crises and expectations, I want our students to be the ones that say, we're not going to be broken by that. So we work very hard to take whatever your original idea is to build a meaningful company. And by a meaningful company, we mean a company that has an impact on the world. So it's my firm belief that we can contribute in a major way by taking what we teach for entrepreneurship and getting it out to the masses in the world. Not just people who come here to MIT, but entrepreneurship at a massive scale. By that, I mean millions of people.
Back when I was in high school, my father brought home one of Jay Forrester's early papers on the world model. It had a huge impression on me. And I ended up then coming here specifically to study system dynamics. Climate change is happening now, and we haven't yet experienced the worst of what's going to happen if we don't dramatically cut emissions. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So we had to come up with a different approach. And our approach is to develop our management flight simulator into climate policy simulation. It's used by policymakers in the United States, in France, in China, in Brazil, in other countries, by the UN. And that's important, but it's not sufficient. If there had been a perfect climate agreement reached in Paris or in Marrakesh, it would have been dead on arrival when it came back to all the capitals of the world, because there simply isn't at this point enough grassroots support for the legislation and the policy changes we need to cut our emissions fast enough. So we created an interactive role-play simulation of the global climate negotiations that we call the World Climate Exercise. We immediately are able to show them what's likely to happen, and what research shows is that, in fact, people who go through this experience learn more about climate science, become much more emotionally engaged around the issue, feel a greater sense of urgency, want to learn more, and express a much greater intention to take action in the real world. Over 30,000 people have participated in the World Climate Exercise in just the last year and a half, and it's growing very rapidly. People are going to the website, everything is there for free, and they're learning how to run it entirely from those materials on their own and taking it to essentially every continent on the planet. Being a school of management, we seek to change the behavior of humans. We seek to influence the way people structure their enterprises. And that's not just an intellectual exercise. That requires touching people's emotions, reaching their hearts as well as their minds. It's really quite amazing to see. That's a great day.
We shine a light on the dark corners to look at complex problems in a whole new way.
We know that there are solutions to be uncovered. It's just a question of how much digging is needed to illuminate them.
The approach we take in our work is a kind of light switch. That is the transformation we seek in the way we approach and solve complex challenges.
There are solutions to many problems that today we can't see. But the reason we can't see them is not because they don't exist. It's only because nobody has yet pulled them into the light.
This is what we do at MIT Sloan. I want to start by joining Roberto Rigobon in thanking Dave Schmidtlein for inviting us to be here today to break through the fourth wall and be here in person. And thank all of you for coming tonight to this great event. I'm really excited to be here, particularly as a finance professor, to be in the capital of finance in the world. But there's one disappointment for me, which is that I really was hoping not to have to follow Professor Rigobon. I mean, you know, how do I compete with that Latin charm? Is there such a thing as Asian charm? There is. I don't know what that is. You know, Latin charm gets you extra bottles of wine. Asian charm maybe gets you a free ticket on United now, but so, sorry. But I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing at Sloan with my collaborators. And it has to do with investments. So I want to start by pitching you a particular investment. The investment is going to require $200 million up front. Not a big number by investment standards these days, but it's going to take 10 years before there's any kind of payout. And there's a 5% chance of a positive payout, but a 95% chance that you'll lose all of it. How many of you would invest in this by a show of hands? Now, maybe you're just being polite, but usually when I ask my MBA students, one or two of them will raise their hands and say, Professor Lowe, you didn't tell us what the rate of return is in that 5% chance that we get a payout. Most people don't even need to know, because when they hear $200 million, 10 years, and a 5% chance of success, no thank you, they're not interested. These are the back of the envelope numbers for what it takes to develop a single anti-cancer drug. And in the unusual case where you actually succeed, in that 5% chance, a cancer drug is worth about $12.3 billion on the day it's approved. That's the NPV, the net present value, at a 10% cost of capital for the revenues that you'll generate. So let me repeat. $200 million up front, 10-year waiting period, 5% chance of $12.3 billion, and a 95% chance of nothing. Now, how many of you would invest in that? Show of hands. Just another startup, yeah. Not a particularly compelling one because it's just too risky for most investors. And that's been the trend in biomedicine. Now, it's a little bit more complicated. This is a very simple example that I've given you because there is plenty of money in biomedicine, but it's for late-stage investments, phase 3 and approved drugs. In fact, in the world of cancer, now there's a lot of money chasing those late-stage assets. But the bottleneck is occurring at the early stages of drug development, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2. So much so that it's called the Valley of Death. And the issue is risk. The risk is too high. The reward is not large enough to justify it. And this is actually affecting a lot of universities, academic medical centers, and the pipeline of drug development projects. And ultimately, it's affecting patients. I learned this in a very personal way a few years ago when my mother was struggling with lung cancer. I was introduced by a friend of a friend to a very successful biotech company that was developing experimental therapies for all sorts of cancers, including lung cancer. And I was privileged to meet with the chief scientific officer, who had no idea who I was, but heard that I was doing something in finance, so he invited his CFO to join us for the meeting. And I asked what I thought was an innocent question at the outset. I asked them, does your source of financing have any influence over your scientific agenda? And the answer that I got absolutely shocked me. The chief scientific officer shook his head ironically, looked at his CFO, and turned back to me, and he said, influence? Our source of financing drives our scientific agenda. And I got to tell you, from the perspective of a son of a patient, I was absolutely outraged by that response. Because what does stock market volatility, interest rates, and Fed policy have to do with whether you should treat cancer via angiogenesis inhibitors or immunotherapy? Nothing. But it drives their scientific agenda. One of which was a particular experimental therapy for my mother that wasn't being developed because the money didn't appear at the time it was supposed to. And so this is a frustrating aspect of the industry that I couldn't understand until I started thinking along the lines of what a finance person would do in this context. And you know exactly where I'm going with it, given the people that are in the audience here. What if instead of investing in one of these projects, we invested in a whole bunch of them, like 150 of them all at the same time? Now, I know that that's a stretch because you would need 150 times 200 million or $30 billion. Where are you going to get $30 billion? Well, as an economist, I have a very simple answer. Assume we have $30 billion. I'll come back to that in a minute. But if we had $30 billion to invest in 150 independent projects, each with a 5% probability of success, do you know what the odds are that you would get at least 3 hits out of 150 after 10 years? In this audience, somebody could probably calculate that off the top of their heads. It's a binomial probability, and the answer is 98%. 98% chance of getting at least 3 hits out of 150 tries. And with those 3 hits, your portfolio of 150 projects would be worth 3 times 12.3 billion or $37 billion. And if you have a portfolio that has a 98% chance of being worth $37 billion in 10 years, it turns out that you can actually finance that by issuing long-term debt, 10-year debt that pays whatever the yield is for debt that has a 98% probability of paying back, which means that you can issue up to $37 billion of bonds which, as of last week, a single A rating, which has a 2% default rate, has about a 3% yield, will bring you $27 billion of cash today. And if you allow me to use all the other tricks of the financial trade, things like securitization, credit default swaps, and other derivative securities, I can do even better. Now, I know what you're thinking. Really? Is that really a good idea? Didn't those techniques figure prominently in the financial crisis? Well, it was actually studying the financial crisis that got me thinking along these lines. Because these techniques, it's not that they didn't work that we had a financial crisis. It's because they worked way too well. These tools are amazingly powerful at raising large amounts of capital focused on specific business opportunities. So imagine if we could take these tools and apply them to raising funds to deal with cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, fusion energy, climate change. What we can do with the world, the greatest challenges using these financing techniques is extraordinary. Now, can we really do this? Well, the short answer is, I have no idea, I'm just a finance professor. But my students and I and other collaborators at MIT and at other universities, we're actually studying this problem by simulating a variety of different financial structures, collecting data, running the back tests, and what we're finding is that actually these techniques look like they're perfectly suited for dealing with some of these challenges, and that the numbers we're getting are actually quite compelling. In addition, we're bringing together a variety of different stakeholders to MIT, holding conferences, both large and small. Some of you have attended them, Cancer X conferences, as well as smaller meetings. And out of these meetings have come a number of pilot projects, one of which is a rare disease company that was launched last year, just got funded this year by a number of venture capitalists and private equity firms that are actually taking these portfolio constructs and implementing them and demonstrating that they actually do change the cost of capital and are bringing more funding into this industry. And the hope is that if we actually are able to get more stakeholders involved, we're going to see this kind of technique applied much more broadly. This is only possible because of the kind of collaborations that we've had with various different parts of MIT, including the students that we use in various different projects. In fact, the very first paper we wrote on this mega fund financing, I co-authored with a Sloan Fellow student, Jose Maria Fernandez. And so we're extremely grateful to all of you, both for what you've done when you were at Sloan, as well as what you do now, because all of you are going to be stakeholders in this particular effort. Now, I know that talking about rates of return and financing in the same breath as life and death issues like cancer can be offensive, sounds obscene. My mother died of cancer, so I get it. But if we don't focus on rates of return, we're not going to get the funding we need to deal with these terrible challenges. Finance is a means to an end, and we shouldn't apologize for it. We should take it, use it, because finance doesn't have to be a zero-sum game if we don't let it. We can do well by doing good, and with all of your help, we can do it now. With that, I would like to thank you all for coming and giving me an opportunity to talk with you, and I'd like to invite Dave Schmittlein back up to the stage for some final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You know, the first voice that you heard this evening on the first video was Andrew Lowe. And he said, the MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school. What's different about it? Yes, modern finance and system dynamics and entrepreneurship is a piece of it. Mind in hand, rigor and relevance. A school that combines not only smart, but also inventive, open, but also grounded. A place where, you know, honestly, you're trained to take on big, difficult challenges, dig in for the facts, apply brilliance and creativity, and invent the future. The future is probably a good place for us to finish off this evening. I have one more story that I'd like to share with you. We don't have a student waiting in the wings to tell you his story or her story. So with your permission, and I have the student's permission, I'd like to tell you this person's story. I was her advisor in her first year at MIT, and so I happened to see the application that she wrote. And in the part of the application where it says, "Why do you want to come to MIT?" here's what she said. "The rooster flew across the classroom. It was the one that my grandfather brought to school the first day of first grade. He brought it because he hoped the teacher would let him stay, but he would not. My grandfather's father was fighting in the war for Korea's independence, and the family members of those fighters were banned from education. Fortunately, Korea received its independence just a couple of years later, and my grandfather was able to start school just a couple of years after his peers. He loved education, and he became a school teacher in that same small town. And his dream for his son was that that son, my father, would go to the best school in Korea and use education to make a difference for people. My father's a doctor in Seoul. My grandfather and my father's dream for me, and my dream for myself, is to go to the best university in the world and to use that education to make a difference for the world. Please let me come to MIT. I have dozens of stories. They're all different, but they're all the same. They're all like that. A couple of years ago, when the journalist Thomas Friedman came to MIT to spend a couple days with students, one thing that they said to him not only stayed with him, but it became the headline of the story that he wrote. That statement was, "We are the people that we've been waiting for." Those are the MIT students. You know, this evening was part of MIT's Campaign for a Better World, and so that you knew I was going to ask you for support, this is the part where I'm going to do that. So put your protectors up. You know, those students, they do need your support, and I think that they deserve your support, and we need to give them opportunities around the country, around the world, and to come to MIT in the first place in ways that we didn't before. The kind of large-scale projects from our faculty that you saw this evening, we weren't doing those projects 20 years ago. No other leading school is doing those projects today. Projects like these. None. So I think our faculty deserve your support also. 10 years ago, when I started as dean, I knew we needed to expand outreach to alums. I also knew that we needed to increase support for students and for faculty, and we did that. And I hoped that you would step up and balance the books, and you did. As we've launched in this last year, this MIT campaign, we've done that again. We've moved to invest in these large-scale faculty projects as we haven't before. We've moved to support students with fellowship aid and with global projects as never before, in the belief that if they do the right things, and if Roberto and Andrew and I tell their truths in the right way, that you'll step up again, and that you'll support the school, and that you'll support them. So I am asking you for support. I'm not asking you to do more than you can. But please don't do less than you can. I know you care. Caring, honestly, isn't enough. There's a theme for MIT Sloan's enrollment and involvement in this campaign. It's "A better world is our business." It can sound like a slogan. It's not to the people at Sloan. It's real to them. It is really about a better world. I hope you're willing to support that idea, and I hope you can see it in the faces of the Sloan people.
To us,
A better world.
is not a lofty vision.
It's not an improbable hope.
It's not a convenient platitude.
It's not even a charge to everyone.
Because then it's a charge to no one.
A better world is ours to make.
A better world is our business.
We know that the important problems today
Are complex problems.
Complexity is our call to action.
We start with questions.
Dig in to find facts.
Build and rebuild.
Ideas made to matter.
In our solutions,
Prove that no problem is too big.
When we're working on it together.
The promise that we take with us
across borders, boundaries, and walls,
Is that we will stay curious.
And we will stay brave.
driven by our conviction
That fixing what's broken
And inventing what's better
Isn't just possible,
It's inevitable. We are the ones to do it.
because impact is our bottom line.
Making a difference is in our DNA.
and though our burden of responsibility is great,
Our ability to change the world,
Is greater.
Today and tomorrow.
a better world.
a better world.
A better world is our business.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for food, drink, and continued conversation around the room.